Let's see. There we go. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome. We'll get started in a moment as people filter in. Interesting. Okay. Well, good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started, and people may continue to join us. I'm Brandy Breslin, and I welcome you to our museum conversations at the Palmer, featuring the special exhibition looking at who we are, the Palmer at 50. As you can see, I'm joined by a large contingent of Palmer staff, and we'll kind of get to those introductions in a moment. Before we get started, though, I would like to do a land acknowledgement as we're here at the Palmer and part of Penn State. We're here working at the museum, even though we are joining you via Zoom. So I want to give this land acknowledgement. The Pennsylvania State University campuses are located on the original homelands of the Erie, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, the Shawnee, the Susquehannock, and the Wazazi nations. As a land-grant institution, we acknowledge and honor the traditional caretakers of these lands and strive to understand and model their responsible stewardship. We also acknowledge the longer history of these lands and our place in that history. In just a moment, I'll turn the program over to begin to our director, Erin Coe. But before that, I wanted to make sure everyone's sort of situated with the Zoom room, and call your attention to the chat on the Zoom menu. If you have comments, please put them in the chat. But if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A feature of the Zoom chat, and I will be monitoring that as we go. Because we do have a full program, we're not sure that we're going to have too much time at the end. We expect to really fill the hour. So we will stay a few minutes after the program to answer a couple of questions, but please know that we will have limited time for questions and that not all of our panelists will be able to stay after. So just wanted to let you know that in advance. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'll turn the program over to our director of the Palmer Museum of Art, Erin Coe, to get us started.
Randy, thank you. And thank all of you for joining us for this virtual presentation of the Palmer Museum's anniversary exhibition, Looking at Who We Are, the Palmer at 50, which opened to the public on Friday, September 23rd. For the past 50 years, the Palmer Museum of Art has inspired audiences from near and far. And the exhibition, Looking at Who We Are, reflects on this storied history while considering our connection to the communities we serve, the place we live and work, and our future, especially now as we prepare for the move to the new building for the Palmer Museum of Art on the grounds of the Arboretum at Penn State. The exhibition was conceived both as a celebration of the Palmer's 50 years, and it takes a broader look at personal and cultural identity through the lens of art, specifically works of art in the museum's permanent collection. Indeed, 74 paintings, drawings, prints, photographs, and sculptures from the collection are featured in the exhibition that span centuries and cultures. The exhibition is organized thematically rather than chronologically and explores how history, place, community, and the future shape our conception of museums and ourselves. An impressive 30-foot-long timeline detailing some of the most noteworthy events in the museum's 5-decade history is the centerpiece of the exhibition. It features significant additions to the collection, groundbreaking exhibitions, the institution's renaming in 1987 in honor of James and Barbara Palmer for their lead gift to the campaign for the Charles Moore designed addition to the building on Curtin Road, and who in 2019 bequeathed their collection to the museum, and many other milestones along the way, including the new museum building that is currently under construction. We hope the premise of this exhibition resonates with you and our audiences, and we invite all to join the Palmer on its journey of reflection and self-assessment as we envision the new museum with socially engaged interpretive strategies and dynamic visitor-centered experiences and interactions. Today's webinar is the first in a series of programs and events, including in-person gallery talks, virtual talks, art after hours, family day, and community day that we are offering this fall in connection with this special exhibition that commemorates the museum's first 50 years. In envisioning our 50th anniversary exhibition and related programming, we established for the first time in the museum's history an advisory committee to provide feedback that helps shape and inform our plans for the museum's anniversary year, including this exhibition. The committee was formed and charged in 2020 and was comprised of representatives from the campus and local community. And I want to take a moment to thank the 15 members of the 50th Anniversary Advisory Committee for their input and engagement that shaped our plans for this milestone year. I also want to extend our gratitude to the exhibition sponsor, Jason Kogan. Jason is a proud Penn State alumnus and a great supporter and friend of the Palmer Museum. In addition to his generous support of our 50th anniversary exhibition, Jason is also a donor to the new building for the Palmer Museum and has named one of the special exhibition galleries. We are tremendously grateful to Jason for his commitment to the Palmer Museum and our bright future. Next, I want to recognize the members of the curatorial team that organized the exhibition Looking at Who We Are. 2 years ago, when we formed the advisory committee, I knew one thing going into this 50th anniversary year, and that was that I wanted to make it highly collaborative among the staff. And I wanted to take a team approach to curating the anniversary exhibition. By doing so, we pooled our areas of expertise and institutional knowledge of the museum's collection and audiences. So my thanks to Brandy Breslin, Patrick McGrady, Joyce Robinson, and Adam Thomas for working together so well to beautifully collaborate in developing this exceptional exhibition that vividly communicates our goal to present 50 years of the Palmer Museum in a new light. And on that note, I'm going to turn the monitor over to Patrick McGrady, who is going to tell us about the first theme of the exhibition devoted to history. Patrick. Oh, Patrick, you're muted.
You know, I knew that was going to happen. We remain mute and we tell ourselves we have to do that when we're about ready to talk, and we never do. At least I don't. All right. So as Aaron mentioned, the first section of this exhibition is history. And as you can see there on the first slide to the left, history looks at how art records and conveys history. It also examines how art helps to create history. And that word create is important for us because as I'm sure we all realize, history is rarely wholly objective. Rather, it can construct according to a particular point of view. with Tompkins Madison's First Communion in the New World, there on the right-hand side, which is the anchor painting for this section. Each of the sections has a single work of art that forms the foundation for that section. With Madison's First Communion in the New World, one of the questions we might initially ask about this painting is, well, whose history is this? The painting depicts the claiming of Newfoundland for England by Sir Humphrey Gilbert. It's a real event. Gilbert landed on Newfoundland in 1583. He incidentally wasn't the first European. Portuguese and Spanish fishermen, English fishermen as well, had inhabited the island for many decades as a temporary housing place. It's a real event, but it's also fictionalized. Humphrey certainly did not land in the company of so many women and children, mostly just sailors. And he didn't land with such a lavish religious ceremony. It's certainly possible that some of them took communion on a Sunday, but not in such a large, not in such a large amount of people. Also, while a new world while Newfoundland might represent the new world for Europeans, it certainly did not do so for the Native Americans depicted there in the shadows in the center left. Their ancestors had inhabited the island off and on for several thousand years. It is, therefore, a history from a European and a 19th century American perspective, but it's not terribly accurate for the indigenous peoples who lived on the island. Next slide, please. The same pertains to Theodore Halle's discovery of America there on the left, to the woman on the hammock who seems a bit surprised to see a European face. There was nothing here to be discovered. She and her people have been there for quite some time. Again, this is European history, depicting one of Amerigo Vespucci's journeys to the Americas. And the question is, why Vespucci? Why not Columbus, who we all know sailed into the Caribbean at least 5 years earlier than Vespucci? See, Halle was Flemish, as was Stradanus, or Jan van der Straat, who prepared the drawing for the engraving. Indeed, Stradanus did preparatory drawings for all 20 of the prints of new discoveries from which this particular image comes. But Stradanus worked for the most part in Florence. He worked for the de' Medici court. Currently, at the time that he drew these pictures, Fernando I was the head of the Medici family. And much of the funding to support Halle's endeavor with new discoveries came from Florentine backers. And Amerigo Vespucci, though he sailed for Spain, was Florentine. Now, Columbus was a fellow Italian, but he hailed from Genoa. Stradanus thus wisely gave the discovery to Vespucci. Florentine history, not Genoese. On the right, it's certainly a reflection of American history. It's a portrait bust of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, an accomplished poet of mid-19th century America, author of Song of Hiawatha and Paul Revere's Ride. But Henry Dexter, who made numerous life studies of Longfellow before carving the portrait, it was done by Henry Dexter, and it's said to be a remarkable likeness. There are letters that have been published attesting to the fact that the sculpture looks exactly like the Longfellow that the authors had known. But it's likely that Longfellow didn't walk the streets of Cambridge, Massachusetts, in a Roman toga. And this is because Dexter meant his sculpture to reflect one of the dominant American aesthetics in early 19th century America, and that was neoclassicism. Artists turned to models of Republican Rome and ancient Greece to purposefully channel those cultures' democratic principles. Next slide, please. And speaking of Rome, here are two very distinct depictions of that city, whose art and especially architecture had a huge influence on Western art for many centuries, particularly after much of it fell into ruins. On the left, Giovanni Piranese's spectacular invocation of Rome's grandeur, even in its ruined state. It's a late splash of Baroque theatrical expression, bombastic and fantastical. Many of the sculptural and architectural fragments existed only in Piranese's imagination, and it speaks rather loudly, I should say, of ancient Rome. On the right, a much quieter memory of Rome by Hubert Robert, working a generation or so later than Piranesi, reflecting Rome not as it was or used to be, but Rome as it is. That is to say, to Robert as he was drawing it. It's a simple depiction of a small party exploring the ruins of the Colosseum, quite the opposite of the Piranesi in tone and volume. And the next slide, please. And finally, here are 4 of the many histories the museum's collection reflects. Objects that record and convey stories ranging from ancient Greece to indigenous cultures of the Northwestern United States. Objects that can tell us who we are or who we were, as long as we're willing to listen. And that's one of our goals with this particular exhibition, to help our audiences listen to what these works of art tell us they are. And the next section, I believe, is going on to Adam.
Hi, thanks, Patrick. You can go to the next slide. There we are. Right, so the second section here is oriented around the matter of place, asking questions about place as, much more than a kind of physical location, a dot on the center of the earth, but the way in which we relate to our places, the way place influences history, and sort of exerts a pull or attraction on the lives and the kind of makeup and character of denizens of a place. So it's oriented around Pennsylvania in particular, and contains 16 works in a variety of media, including prints, photographs, and 1 watercolor. But the largest work and the centerpiece of this section is Jane Quigsy Smith's painting that you see here, this painting and collage from the mid-1990s. The artist is a citizen of the Confederated Salish tribe, which is in Montana. And works like this by her are these attempts to counter persistent stereotypes about American Indians as, static and belonging to the world of the past. And in this work in particular, she's exploring, this kind of multiplicity and even kind of contradictory issues around contemporary Native identity through this use of collage newspaper headlines and advertisements, many of which relate to kind of indigenous news items. And as you can see, they're organized in the format of a map of the United States, but the borders and boundaries between the states and between the other nations to the north and to the south are, somewhat in question, are blurred through dripping paint, in a sense, kind of questioning, the shifting boundaries and the legacies of the ways in which various boundaries have been kind of redrawn across various centuries. And you can go to the next slide. And she's also, playing through the use of a map with a kind of legacy of abstract art of the last half century or so, particularly this use of maps, these sort of found objects in sort of neo-dada or kind of proto-pop works by Jasper Johns, for instance, that I show you at left. And it's also sort of, well steeped in this sort of painterly legacy of expressionism and kind of neo-expressionism from the post-war period and also the 1980s. Notably, Quigsy Smith is the subject of her first New York large-scale retrospective next year in 2023 at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Let's go to the next slide. I think some of these issues around, shifting state national boundaries and matters of indigeneity haunt or inform, earlier maps that are in the Palmer's collection, like the example you see at the right, this 1831 double page view from an atlas. These sorts of maps were constantly being redrawn particularly to include new frontiers in the West, but also new construction in terms of the railroad routes. So they were coming out, sort of every year, every other year, something like that. And it's worth noting, I think, that, at the time that this map was published, in the early 1830s, the United States, didn't constitute all the states that we know today, but was something like 25 states and then various Western sorts of territories that, of course, were under, different indigenous peoples live there, or different national claims. The Spanish, for example, were all involved with the history of kind of placemaking and the way in which those boundaries have fluctuated. And of course, this also relates, I think, in terms of the way these things sort of shift, and peoples, in particular, indigenous American peoples, were, displaced. One notable example being right around this time, the very consequential, very violent Indian Removal Act of 1830 that affected many tribes, including the Lenape in Pennsylvania. And then at the left, this is coupled with another print after a very well-known history painting by Benjamin West, who is considered, one of the early painters in colonial North America, born in Pennsylvania. And you see William Penn there entering into a treaty with the chief of the Lenape, this, trading for the land that will eventually become his namesake. This very kind of foundational moment in the history of the colony of Pennsylvania and the building and kind of construction of Pennsylvania as a discrete place. This is an engraving, as I said, after this painting from a few years prior, a 1772 painting that's in the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. And maybe one of the most kind of interesting thing is that this event likely did not occur. It's much contested by historians. It's not recorded in any original primary source documents. So this notion of a kind of equitable trading and sort of peaceful negotiations is very much kind of under pressure here. And when it was commissioned by William Penn's son in the late 18th century, there's a way in which this kind of idealized path that's being represented is a way to kind of efface the ongoing subjugation and hostilities towards indigenous peoples that was, inherent and a big part of European colonization in the Americas. Let's go to the next slide, please. A little bit closer to home. So we see these two views of the university here, State College. The one on the left, features the original main building, this 1860s building that was constructed and for the original college, housing, classrooms, residential life, offices, and all of those kind of goings on of the early university, the early Agricultural College of Pennsylvania in those years. And then shortly thereafter, it changed its name, of course, to Pennsylvania State College and went through other names as we know it today. That building stood until the late 1920s, when it was destroyed, razed to construct what we know of as the new Old Main, or Old Main today. And this is seen in a view on the right by a printmaker who was also a horticultural plant specialist on the faculty of Penn State for some 3 decades, starting in the 1920s. So it's become this kind of iconic symbol. And, we're just sort of tracing some of those development of these kind of icons and asking questions about them. Let's go to the next slide. They're showing these. So, in addition to kind of picking up threads around central Pennsylvania, there's also, kind of urban vistas and sort of urban settings from both Eastern Pennsylvania, as I show you here in these examples from Philadelphia, rather, this early print of it as a thriving port, this kind of bustling scene of commerce and a modern city seen in a very expansive view. Here, coupled with this rather more intimate view from about the same moment in the mid-19th century, very shortly after the invention of photography as a medium, showing this kind of intimate sort of street level view of this bakery actually in Norristown, which is far from Philadelphia. Let's go to the next slide. Right. So then in addition to these sort of urban scenes or kind of urban history that's being unpacked and kind of unfolding in this section, we also see these kind of rural, rural kind of American scene images being included. One, particularly well-known modernist painter who was also a prolific photographer, Charles Sheeler from Philadelphia himself, and then at right, this really kind of dynamic and interesting artist who was pivotal to the kind of invention and championing of the medium of screen printing in the early 1840s, and particularly writes a book on it. And he's also doing these various scenes of this town or in and around Easton, Pennsylvania, at the eastern border of Pennsylvania. Let's go to the next one, please. Right. So then again, sort of, pitting to some extent Philadelphia then here with two scenes of Pittsburgh to kind of balance things out. Interestingly, this Fred Alexander watercolor was purchased by the museum in its first year directly from the WPA. Little is known about Fred Alexander, but we know he probably worked for the WPA, and this is this kind of scene, celebrating the new sort of modernity of America, these recently constructed Three Sisters bridges spanning the river in Pittsburgh there, showing one of them in his example here. And then another view of this sort of more moodier nocturnal scene by the photojournalist Eugene Smith, who had initially, planned on a commission to be shooting photos in Philadelphia for about 3 weeks, and then ends up become so kind of captivated and fascinated by the city is shooting there for 3 years, and becomes his most kind of significant body of work that he produces there in the 1950s. Let's go to the next one. Just running through these again, sort of two disparate temporally scenes of the Susquehanna River. The scene by Fanny Palmer, who is a very accomplished, prolific, noted lithographer in the mid-19th century, even considered one of the first professional women artists in America. And we see the scene that she's rendering during the Civil War, Harrisburg as a kind of, battlements and fortifications, it as a strategic supply chain line during that conflict. And then a later scene, this sort of idyllic scene of the river in a tripartite structure here, this triptych format, where there's a nuclear power plant sort of nested within this aestheticized, idealized urban space, suggesting the ways in which I think some environmental impacts or kind of ecological degradation can sometimes be sort of, not visible, or also serving as a warning in his recording here. I think there's one more slide, Brandy, thank you. And then sort of lastly, considering some of the three historically major industries that Pennsylvania was involved with, very interesting to me is the location in Northwest Pennsylvania of the first kind of oil boom, the petroleum industry in the 1850s, that's suggested by this Imperial Oil Refinery Company image in 1875. There around Oil City, Pennsylvania, of course, it's kind of namesake town. And then the top image, Harry Sternberg, completing a lot of images, prints in particular of the steel industry, these sort of belching factories that are sometimes, rendered in kind of monstrous ways as they sort of dwarf and overpower and kind of overshadow the personalities and the individual there. He also executed a mural in Pennsylvania in a post office. And then lastly, Michael Gallagher, a Pennsylvania-born artist, born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, showing this mine disaster in his print there at the lower right. The way these communities are trying to work to rescue various kind of trapped miners, the anguish of onlookers, and so on. So representing these three sort of major industries that so much of Pennsylvania's kind of economics have been tied up with throughout, well, centuries really. So the oil industry, the steel industry, and the coal mining industry. Thank you. So I will turn it over now to Joyce.
Brandy, you might have to let me in again. Well, I can also just speak. Can you all hear? Oh, there we
Come
go.
on.
Sorry about that. Didn't want to let me back in. I've been here. Thank you. It was nice hearing from all of you. So, and thank you all for being here today. So in some ways, I think the central part of this exhibition in some ways is about community, which makes perfect sense. Community, as you can see there, focuses on our shared experiences and social interactions, and of course connects us with others around common interests and purpose. Can you go to the next slide, Brandy? You'll see when I mentioned that this is kind of in some ways a centerpiece. Community occupies the entire back wall of the exhibition, and I think quite appropriately, it is opposite the timeline. And of course, community infiltrates the timeline from beginning to the current time. And so it seems, I think, particularly fitting to have this installed as we do. And I think you can see at the center of community is a rather sizable painting. I'm going to have you, go ahead and go forward, Brandy, to the next slide. This is Simon Dinnerstein's The Fulbright Triptych from 1971 to 1974. You can see the dimensions there, quite a sizable work. And of course, in that wonderful installation shot, you get a sense of the presence of this remarkable work. This is a painting that we decided to feature as the focal point of community for a number of reasons. One, though, is because, as you can see from the credit line, this was purchased with funds provided by the Friends of the Palmer Museum of Art. The Friends of the Museum of Art was founded in 1974, 2 years after the founding of the museum. And their membership dollars initially all went towards acquisitions exclusively. And Bill Hall, founding director, brought this to the attention of the Friends, I believe, at a purchase party. And this was the work that they selected. So a very nice sort of acknowledgement there of the importance of Friends to the Museum of Art. All right, so the Fulbright Triptych has an entire book written about it. I will show it to you here. It's available in the store. Features essays by a remarkable array of scholars and great thinkers, from musician-composer George Crumb to writer Jhumpa Lahiri to many curators and art historians. It's a wonderful compendium. And one of the contributors is Simona Dinnerstein, who is the little baby that you see there on her mother's lap. Some of you may know Simona's name because Simona has gone on to be a world-renowned classical pianist, and you often hear her featured on NPR. But Simona, in her short essay in the book, describes the Fulbright Triptych as a real-life fairy tale. This painting is deeply autobiographical. It is very much about the artist Simon Dinnerstein. It was begun in 1971, as you can see, in Germany. Simon was 28 years old. He had gone to Germany with his wife. Simona was but a twinkle in his eye at that point. She was not with the family yet. And Simon had gotten a Fulbright to Germany and was there in 1970-71. Now, interestingly, he had gone over, this Fulbright was to study printmaking and was to look at the art of Dürer. And if you look at that central panel, you can see one of the sort of, I think, one of the great almost ambiguities of this painting is that this is a large scale painting of the studio, about the studio of a printmaker. And at the very heart of it is a copper plate, an engraved plate. You can see the detail on the upper right. Below it is a copy of the print that would have been made from this copper plate. It is called Angela's Garden, 1970, an engraving. You can see it there. And please note that the Museum of Art at Penn State, now the Palmer, owned that engraving long before they acquired the painting. So that was purchased for the museum in 1976. But the story gets even better. Next slide. And now the Palmer Museum of Art is in possession of the actual copper plate at the center of the Fulbright triptych that you see there. The plate for Angela's Garden, also 1970. And this is a recent gift in 2021, gift of Laurie Cohen and Christopher Rothko. All right, so what do we make of this then? And of course, this is a kind of remarkable homage to printmaking and a printmaker's workshop. You see a large table there, almost, dare I say, like an altar, with the utensils, the equipment, the tools that a printmaker would use displayed across that table. And of course, at the very center is this golden, luminous, shining copper plate, which, by the way, Simon used gold leaf on that plate because he wanted it to have that kind of luminous, glowing quality. Interestingly, one of the writers in the volume that I showed you likens it to the flattened halos in a Giotto painting, which I think is a really wonderful, apt comparison. And of course, there is a kind of sacred quality to this painting, or at least a religious quality to this painting, when you think about the format. This is a triptych, right? And normally we would see a triptych at the high altar used for religious narratives. The triptych as a format originated in the north of Europe. So it's not surprising that Simon, who is in Germany, looking at Dürer, looking at the art around him, becomes interested in this format, which typically is used for the Holy Family, right? With patrons and angels in the side panels. And of course, on the side panels here, we have Simon and his wife, Renee, and his future child, Simona there. So let's go to the next slide. So it is indeed a kind of homage to this printmaking part of Simon's life. And I should say to you that this was Simon's first real painting out of art school. And quite an ambitious painting it is, of course. And you can see that he has tacked onto that wall all of the reproductions and photographs and postcards of the artists throughout the history of art who have inspired him. And so this is in many ways about this family unit, their experience in Germany at this time, but it's also situating Simon, the artist, in a much larger context of looking at the history of art, looking at Indian miniatures that you see. I've put a number of details on the right, looking, of course, at Van Eyck. We're not at all surprised to see that. Looking at Seurat, and to the left of Seurat, that detail of a woman standing in an interior, that's actually a reproduction of a painting by Harvey Dennerstein, who was the brother of Simon, and in fact, who recently passed away last year, and who is also represented in our collection. Now, the context for this painting in the 1970s, really, we have to think more broadly at sort of realist figurative art that is certainly prominently featured in the collection of the Palmer. I think of our Philip Pearlstein, Jerome Witkin, Richard Diebenkorn comes to mind as well. But this is realism pushed to its extreme, right? Simon is interested in showing us both the macro and the micro, right? Every detail out that window of this village in Germany, every detail of the works of art that are inspiring him, every detail of those printmaker tools that are displayed across that table. Let's see, I don't think I want to go to the next slide yet. So I do, though, want to make one final point about this, and then I will just briefly talk about the other sections. Jhumpa Lahiri, in her essay in the book, talks about the kind of secular trinity that she thinks that Simon is getting to. And by the way, I should say that this was started in Germany. The central panel, he was working on it. Simon took it back to Brooklyn and then finished it there. It took another 2 years to finish. And that was when Simona was born, and hence Simona makes her entrance into the painting. But Jhumpa Lahiri makes some wonderful points about this secular trinity, as she calls it. And she notes the 3 panels, the 3 figures, the 3 subjects: portraiture, still life, landscape, the 3 levels of representation, the painting itself, reproductions of other paintings, painted renditions of those reproductions. There's many, many different layers here. But of course, there's also a kind of dualism at work in any good religious narrative. And by the way, I should say too, at the heart of any good religious narrative is a garden, right? Remember that cover plate, Angela's Garden. And we see here the dualism of male and female, husband and wife, artist and family, family and the world, right? And I think that really, in many ways, what we're looking at is here a kind of garden of creativity, of procreativity also, and a very safe, protective environment for this artist facing the world. Next slide, Randy. So the triptych really inspired 3 different sections as I was putting together the checklist. And the first has to do with family rituals and the domestic sphere. These are just a few examples of works from that section. The Milton Rogovan, a Buffalo photographer, also an optometrist, very interested in photographing working individuals, both at work and at home. And we have in this section, we feature 2 alums, Steve McCurry, a noted photographer. His Afghan girl photograph, probably one of the most famous photographs of the 20th century. He was a graduate from Penn State in 1974, showing us here a family from Mauritania at home. And then John Biggers, an alum 3 times over, 3 degrees from Penn State, in this absolutely gorgeous drawing, going to church. Again, families, the protection of families, the love of families, and enacting the rituals of domestic life. Next slide, Randy. And I also picked up on that male-female dichotomy that in some way frames the Fulbright triptych. And then we have a section dedicated to gatherings of like-minded individuals, of fraternal gatherings, you could say, and it ranges from these early engineers who are working on the railway to the Capital Wrestling Corporation by Neil Slavin over there on the left. And of course, we have gatherings of women as well. Walter Rosenblum, love this Rodchenko. Fantastic photograph, making way for women. But I particularly love too the Mary Beth Edelson, Some Living American Women Artists. This was a gift of our former director, Jan Muellert. And you see that this is her spoof of the male exclusivity of the patriarchy, as she says. And there at the center, taking the place of Jesus, is Georgia O'Keeffe, holding court with her many disciples. And her disciples, I should point out, include Judith Bernstein, who is in the upper left corner, and Judith Bernstein is a graduate from Penn State as well. And my last slide before I hand this back to Brandy, I will point out too that, of course, embedded in the Fulbright triptych is the lineage of art, the history of art, the teaching and pedagogy of art, and passing that on. And as an academic art museum, of course, this is very, very important to us. So a few works that are included in this section include this kind of remarkably early Philip Pearlstein. You might not recognize it as a Philip Pearlstein, but Philip Pearlstein studied at the Carnegie Institute of Technology, got his BFA degree in 1949. So this is indeed quite a very early work before he establishes his reputation as a realist figure painter. That was a gift of Betty and Ed Mathill, and Betty Mathill was a classmate of Philip Pearlstein, and she donated this really lovely self-portrait from the same period. And then lastly, we're delighted to have this painting called The Art Lesson by Mary Godfrey. Mary Godfrey was the first full-time Black faculty member at Penn State. She came here in 1957 under sort of the tutelage, if you will, of Victor Lowenfeld, and went on to have a very long career here as a teacher. So I will turn it over now to Brandy.
All right, hello. So I will be talking about the future section of the exhibition, as that was the portion that I organized. And the future section features works that address significant influences of history, place, and community, the other sections of the exhibition, but with reference to concepts of the future. So the anchor or focus work, sorry about that, is this large-scale photograph, Going Home, from 2004 by Eleanor Antin. As we've been showing you, there's a feature work in each of the sections. And this work by Eleanor Antin, I'm going to share a little bit with you about this work. So as a conceptual artist, Eleanor Antin has been an important voice in the art world since the mid-1960s. Her work has included filmmaking, performance art, conceptual work. Here, she has staged and photographed an imagined narrative of an ancient Roman scene, a beach littered with tidbits of architectural ruins and statuary, and a collection of players in togas and tunics that are embarking on a return journey to the sea. But at the same time, Antin is visually referencing another time period with the photographs matte surface, the large scale sort of mural size format, and the blonde tonalities. She's deliberately referencing 19th century European paintings. That was, of course, a period and style of academic paintings that also tended to look back, right, to ancient narratives, to Roman visuals, and those references. So in speaking about her inspiration for this series, Antin, the series title is Roman Allegories, and in talking about that inspiration, Antin talks about driving through Southern California and at some point catching sight of the ocean. And she was struck by this thought of a comparison to the ancient city of Pompeii, which, as we know, had been a bustling, wealthy city that was completely destroyed, caught off guard one day by a natural disaster, a very famous one, of course. And so she was struck by this idea that history often repeats itself, right? And she saw similarities between our current society, sort of going forward in everyday life as we perhaps march headlong and seemingly uncaring towards climate change and some cataclysmic possible events with that. So what she's doing here by intermingling these various histories, Antin is really highlighting, right, patterns and recurrences. And so this itself evokes a sense of the future in that these things that have happened multiple times in the past may well happen again in the future. And along with that, she gives us this jolt of absurdism as well. The umbrellas that these figures hold, while I did look it up, and umbrellas have been around for 4,000 some years. So they could very well be likely true to the time period of Roman period. They do very much look contemporary. So At any rate, she sort of jolts us with that absurdism, though, of these figures holding an umbrella to keep themselves dry as they march headlong into the ocean. So that really kind of shows us the futility, right, of their actions. And so also kind of drawing our attention to present day issues, right, sort of trying to wake us up about this environmental crisis, perhaps urging us towards action, towards a more mindful future, and perhaps avoiding those mistakes that happened in the past. Similarly, and as we've kind of showed with our looking at the featured works in each of the sections, we kind of have the relationship with other themes in the show. Sorry, I did fail to remember that I had the larger image for you to look at. I'll give you a moment here. We'll see some of these ideas or themes reflected in other works in the future section. So interesting to note that these works could have fit easily in other sections of the exhibition, in the history section, in the community section, in the place section. But sort of the future section is definitely dealing with all of these things put together with a view towards perhaps making change for the future. The work on the left by Jacob Lawrence, this very well-known artist, right? Throughout his long career, Jacob Lawrence embraced Black subject matter in historical narratives as well as seeds of the everyday life. This image in particular features civil rights marchers that are bravely confronting a snarling dog on the left. And it most likely represents multiple historical events, again, including a 1963 march on Birmingham, Alabama, that was led by Martin Luther King Jr., as well as a 1965 march from Selma, when the nonviolent protesters were met by attacks by state troopers and their canines after crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So in that same way, sort of repeating these multiple instances that we saw in Anton's work, Lawrence is also kind of repeating those to come to a more sort of generalized note, and perhaps urging us again towards action or reminding us about this sort of quest for an equitable future. Similarly, the work on the right by Yolanda Lopez, artist Yolanda Lopez often sort of challenged cultural stereotypes and often dealt with sort of featuring Mexican American women. And she would often adapt to other images in her work. So this work, titled Women's Work is Never Done, combines a couple of different images. A 1995 photograph, the group of women sort of on the right, are farm laborers from a 1995 broccoli harvest. And then on the left, sort of seemingly in the background, but sort of hovering there over the figures on the right, is a 1965 photograph of Dolores Huerta, who was an influential labor activist and the co-founder of the United Farm Workers Association. So bringing these images together, Huerta is holding a sign, huelga, that is Spanish for strike. And so that seems to encourage our group that's in the foreground here. Perhaps pairing these images from different time periods again is that visual touchstone that kind of refers to the adage we have in the title, right? Women's work is never done, implying that it's going to continue into the future. And then reinforcing that idea that we build on progress from the past in order to continue to make change for a better future. Other works in the exhibition take more of sort of a visual approach, or looking at how images might celebrate industry, technology, and perhaps the capacity to build and plan the future. So the work on the left by Riva Helfand is, this artist is best known for her social realist studies and of the lives of working people. During the 40s and 50s, she moved towards abstraction in this work. In construction, she depicts a large ship during the building process with long-armed cranes and this grid-like scaffolding that evokes a sense of the importance of tools and work and technology towards planning and realizing future goals. The work on the right by Minna Wright Citron. This artist had a long and productive career as a painter and printmaker, and her work and career spanned from the late 20s to the late 1980s. Also in the 1940s, she turned towards abstraction, like Halfond on the left. And Citron was really inspired by experimental printmaking workshop, Atelier 17. While she was there, she really embraced sort of the modernism movement and visuals, and she pursued an interest in the surrealist techniques to access the unconscious mind. This work, titled Flight to Tomorrow, she seems to refer to the power of the imagination, right, in developing and planning and creating future technologies. So the final grouping in this future section is really sort of implicating the viewer and the viewer's present moment in a journey forward. And these three works here, I just want to check time. Okay, so on the left is Thurman Statham, and he's considered a pioneer of contemporary glass movement. These the sandblasted surfaces of his glass works often are presented in the forms of ladders or houses or chairs. So common items that we all have reference for in our own life, and they become a canvas for vibrant colors and details. I just took a group of students through today, and two different students sort of chose this work to speak about and how they felt that it just embodied joy and that idea of sort of education, which is something that Statham does in fact focus on education in the arts. He's very active in providing workshops to people of all ages to have sort of an experiential relationship with the arts and hands-on experiences. So the latter form is really an apt metaphor for his embrace of that idea of education and leading us right forward, the latter being a great visual for sort of progress and movement upward and forward. In the middle is a work by, or a small detail of a work by Matthew Northridge. And this project, again, sort of combines simple materials and references. It's titled Horizon, and it features hundreds of small round discs that each contain in it a visual image of a horizon line, an ocean sort of horizon. So per the artist, the work stretches from one end of the wall to the other, and as many of the discs that are necessary in order to fill up that space are installed. So once they are sort of collectively installed, they create this new horizon, right, on the wall itself in the gallery. And this sort of becomes this variegated, sort of pulsing with color, sort of energized horizon. And it seemingly sort of, right, draws the viewer into the expanse, going out from where we are right now. Sort of, again, that interplay of where I am with sort of referencing a timeline, right, past, present, and future right there in the horizon. And finally, on the right, I wanted to share this image by George Loftus Noyes, which notably, this is the only work that's in the exhibition that's not a part of our permanent collection, but it is a bequest, a promised gift from the collection of Tom Clark. And so at once, this represents the future of the Palmer Museum of Art in sort of works that will be coming to us down the road. But this work, with the placement of the viewer here at the humble dirt road that stretches before you, sort of enveloping the viewer in this calm, serene, sort of comforting scene of this dappled with sunlight and shadows, really enveloping us and referencing again this sort of comfortable, evoking a new journey moving forward. So those are sort of the works that are featured in the future section. I did want to share one other element to the exhibition, and that is an interactive component that we're asking visitors to participate in. This picture of the Post-it notes in the center is not accurate, but at the time we built the PowerPoint, we didn't have a good picture. There are actually stories already being collected from visitors. And so this is an opportunity for our visitors to share their story, to participate in the conversation, to kind of tell us what the Palmer has meant to them throughout its history, even if today was their first visit. So that's a great opportunity to come in and participate. Let's see. And while I have you, being the person that has sort of worked on developing these programs, I want to share with you some upcoming adult programs. We also have, as Erin mentioned earlier, Art After Hours and Family Days programs that are incorporating this exhibition, looking at who we are. But these programs coming up are ones that you all might be interested in. We have Gallery Talk coming up August 12th with Professor Karen Kiefer Boyd. You'll notice that there's 4 talks here. We have 4 sections of the exhibition. So each of our sections is sort of featured in this talk. It's a collaboration with our colleagues across the campus. So Dr. Kiefer Boyd is a professor of art education. She does a lot of work with building community through the arts. And so that really ties into our community section. Our own Erin Coe is curating an exhibition on the museum's future building, which was very perfectly a program for that exhibition, as well as our future section for this exhibition. And then November 2nd, we have professor in the School of Education, and we'll be doing a talk and an activity on the ideas around place. And finally, our program that relates to history is by Professor Sasha Coles. She will be talking about sort of how Disney creates and recreates history as sort of an illustration of some of those ideas that we have in our history section. And at that point, we are at the end of our presentation. So thank you for being here. Turn our attention. We are right at time, as promised. We thought we were going to fill up the hour, and we did. I am now looking the opportunity to look and see if we have any questions in our chat or Q&A. I don't see those. So fellow panelists, curators, I don't know if you have anything to add, or at this point, I think we could probably say thank you for joining us today. I don't know what happened there.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everyone.
We'll see you at the museum.